Louise was a lonely loser who lived in a mystical world filled with mages, wizards, and demons, where strong magic was valued over everything else. She was born in a family of legendary mages, but unfortunately she was a total failure just like me who couldn't control her magic at all. Everything changes one day when she ends up summoning a young boy from modern-day Japan instead of a magical creature. But this boy helps her become the strongest in the world. On her first day as a second-year student at Tristane Academy of Magic, Louise attends an alchemy lecture taught by a new teacher named Chevy who introduces herself as an earth mage. She begins the lecture by asking what the 4 magical elements are, to which a fruity twink named Bronze stands up and correctly answers fire, water, earth, and wind. The teacher explains that earth is the magical element that governs the creation of all things and demonstrates this by turning 4 ordinary stones into brass with a simple chant. She then picks Louise from the back of the room to try and repeat the same thing, which causes a stir in the classroom. The students nervously ask her not to make Louise cast the spell, which pisses Louise off, and she yells out that she will do it. Following the teacher's instructions, she imagines the metal she wants and recites the chant while pointing her wand at the stones. They instantly start glowing, and the next second, an explosion goes off that knocks the teacher out and destroys the classroom. She very casually says she made a small mistake while everyone else yells at her and calls her zero. After meeting the dean for the incident, she runs into the school's mean girl named Kendall, who is excited to find out how Louise is being punished. Louise reveals she has not gotten into any trouble because the responsibility was put on the teacher, who should have backed off when the students warned her about Louise. Kendall and her minions start laughing and joke about how Louise will make a fool of herself in tomorrow's spirit summoning ceremony as well. Louise immediately barks out that she has full confidence she will summon the strongest and most beautiful familiar spirit the school has ever seen and marches off. The next day, a bald teacher welcomes the second-year students to the most awaited summoning ceremony, which will determine each person's familiar spirit that will serve them for the rest of their life. One by one, each student summons their spirit, and Bronze gets a giant mole, while Kendall gets a fire salamander. This leaves only Louise, who is yet to summon a spirit, and everyone's eyes are on her. She smugly raises her wand up to the sky and yells out that she is calling the most beautiful, sacred, and powerful spirit to come to her. As usual, an explosion sets off, but once the dust settles, a random dude in a tracksuit is found lying on the grass. Everybody, including Louise, is disgusted by the sight of him, thinking that he is some low-life plebeian. Once he gains consciousness, he looks around frantically to see a bunch of weirdos in cloaks and thinks he is in some Harry Potter convention. He doesn't understand the language they're speaking and doesn't have any clue where he is. Louise requests the teacher to let her summon a spirit again, but he refuses, saying that it defeats the purpose of the sacred ceremony, and she is forced to accept him as her spirit because she will get expelled if she doesn't. Once she completes the familiar spirit ritual by kissing him, a contract is formed between them, causing the boy's body to heat up until the spirit rune is carved onto the back of his hand, and he faints. He wakes up to find himself in yet another uncowned room with Louise and demands to be taken back to his home. She ignores his blabbering and throws her dirty clothes at him and tells him to wash them, expecting him to understand what she wants even if he doesn't understand her language because he's her familiar spirit. The plebeian just stays put and keeps yapping about God knows what, so she casts a silence spell on him which explodes in his face and burns the clothes in his hands. The guy gets up frustrated and yells out that he is going to have to use force now, but once he grabs her, she exclaims that she now understands him. Indeed, both of them can suddenly understand each other because of Louise's failed silence charm. They introduce themselves to each other when the boy reveals his name is Sato. Louise lectures him about this world and whines about being stuck with a lame familiar spirit like him when he slips away from the room and runs away. He tries to figure his way out of the maze-like castle when he is noticed by Bronze, who is flirting with a first-year student. He tells Sato to thank him because he is a noble, but still went through the trouble of carrying Sato to Louise's room when he went out cold. Sato thanks him and starts running again after hearing Louise's footsteps behind him. He finally makes it to the exit, but not long after. He is lifted from the ground and levitated around by Bronze after Louise requests him for help. Kendall also arrives to see the commotion and starts making fun of Louise for being the first mage to have a familiar spirit that ran away from their master. Sato, who is still being levitated, sees a second moon in the sky, which finally makes him realize that he is in a whole different world now. Once he is brought down and tied up like a dog in Louise's bedroom, he explains how he comes from another world where humans live on Earth. He was an ordinary teenager living in 21st century Japan when he saw a weird floating orb in a street, and after he went to inspect it, it sucked him in and teleported him to Halkaginia. Louise finds this hard to believe and refuses to return him to Earth because the contract between master and familiar spirit is permanent. She then throws her filthy clothes at him, commands him to wash them and ready her clothes for the next day. He tries to protest, but she warns him that she will only feed him if he does his work obediently and promptly falls asleep. Helpless, Sato crawls over to his sad excuse for a bed on the floor and sleeps as well. The next morning, Louise is awoken by Sato, who throws neatly folded clothes at her. After doing what he's told, she unlocks the leash on his neck and takes him to the school dining hall for breakfast. He drools over the lavish spread of food on the tables, but Louise reveals that all of it is only for the noblemen and that plebeians like him have to sit on the floor and eat a piece of stale bread. He eats the sad loaf with tears in his eyes, and once they leave the hall, Louise has the audacity to say he should be grateful she let him inside because familiar spirits are usually made to wait outside. She then leads him to a garden where a bunch of snobby nobles like her are being served tea. She explains that there are no classes for the second-year students that day as they are supposed to strengthen their bonds with their spirit companions. Kendall boasts her fire salamander named Flame at Louise, which scares Sato, who tells her to keep it in a cage, to which she explains that familiar spirits follow the orders of their masters, so there is no need to do so. She then mocks Louise by accusing her of bringing Sato ahead of the summoning ceremony and pretending to summon him, which Louise fiercely rejects. Kendall still has the last laugh by calling her and Sato a perfect match. Louise sits herself down and orders Sato to serve her some tea. On his way, he bumps into a girl who drops a piece of cake she was carrying. He apologizes and picks it up for her, but soon realizes she isn't rude like everyone else. She asks him if he's the rumored plebeian who has become the familiar spirit of a Valier daughter. After confirming this, he asks her what exactly it means to be a plebeian, to which she replies that everyone who can't use magic are plebs. When he asks her if she is a noble, she giggles and introduces herself as Siesta, a plebeian just like him who works as a maid at the school. Bronze interrupts their conversation by asking for his cake. Sato takes the opportunity to get back at him for toying with him while levitating him last night by serving him the cake that Siesta dropped. When he goes over, he overhears Bronze flirting with his classmate Monty by saying that she is the only one for him. Sato, who heard him use the same lines for the first year last night, finishes his pickup line and reveals to Monty what a playboy he is. She doesn't believe him at first, but starts getting suspicious anyway. He then smugly walks away and directs the first-year girl to him before Bronze can run away with Monty. The girl cheerfully offers him a soufflé she made, to which he tries to play ignorant, but Sato butts in and says that this is good for Bronze because he heard him tell her last night that he wants to have a taste of her desserts. Bronze is shocked at Sato's defiance, but Sato continues and insists that he heard everything Bronze said to the girl. By now, this messy situation starts attracting the other students, and once a crowd forms, Sato drops the bomb that Bronze is double dating Monty and the first-year girl. Bronze tries to deny the allegations, but they call him a liar and Monty slaps him. Everybody around them laughs at him, causing Bronze to become furious and warns Sato that he doesn't know how to talk to nobles. Sato brushes it off by saying he comes from a world that doesn't have such dumb rules, but Bronze's eyes light up with revenge. He challenges Sato to a duel for acting inappropriately for a mere familiar spirit pleb and for making two girls cry. Sato points out that they didn't cry but are mad at him, to which the crowd laughs. Even more pissed off, Bronze stands his ground and tells him that he'll wait for him at Vestry Field for the duel. An angry Louise calls Sato dumb for accepting the duel and tries to drag him to apologize to Bronze because a non-magic pleb can never win against a noble, but Sato refuses to back down and marches to Vestry Field himself to throw hands. The crowd follows soon after, and Louise tries to put an end to the duel at the last moment by reminding Bronze that duels are prohibited. He corrects her by saying that duels are prohibited between nobles, but she points out that it's because there's never been one between a noble and a plebeian. Bronze teases Louise that her heart has been swayed by Sato, but she retorts that she doesn't want her familiar spirit to be harmed. Bronze ignores this and conjures a bronze Valkyrie from the ground with his earth elemental magic. The Valkyrie punches Sato's gut, causing him to fall to the ground, but he quickly gets up and says that his puppet is weak. He takes hit after hit, but doesn't accept defeat to the point that Louise begs him not to continue. Bronze smirks and magically creates a sword and gives Sato the option to either continue fighting him with it or stop the duel by saying sorry. Sato goes to grab the sword, but Louise urges him not to. He tells her that he has no control over his situation now and that he is stuck in this world to live a low life, and he will deal with all of it, but he will never apologize to someone he doesn't want to. After saying this, he picks up the sword and raises it, which somehow causes his pain to disappear. The Valkyrie lunges at him, but he swings his sword and cuts it in half. Bronze makes several Valkyries attack him at once, but he slices through each of them and gets in Bronze's face, causing Bronze to fall and accept embarrassing defeat. Sato puts the sword down to celebrate, but immediately dozes off from exhaustion. When he wakes up, he finds himself lying on a bed and wrapped in bandages. Siesta walks into the room with food and drink and expresses relief that he's finally woken up after 3 whole days. She reveals that it was Louise who asked her to bring the food and that she has been losing sleep by taking care of him. Sato finds her sleeping on the desk and can't decide whether she's nice or a brat. He gets his answer when she plops 3 days worth of laundry for him to wash as soon as she wakes up. He tries to thank her for taking care of him, but she snappily tells him that's the duty of a master to take care of their familiar spirit and that he should always be grateful anyway. After doing the laundry, she makes him escort her to class, which he gets to sit through as well. Teacher Chevy explains that all the magical elements can be combined to make stronger effects, and the level of a mage is determined by how many elements they can combine. She then asks if anyone knows what the different levels are, to which Monty answers that combining 2 elements makes a line, 3 makes a triangle, and 4 makes a square. Chevy says that hopefully soon some students will learn to combine elements, but everyone must already know how to use at least one. Kendall butts in for no reason and points out that Louise the Zero can't use any. Sato is also there to rub salt in her wounds after class by singing a song he made up that basically calls her a worthless loser. This pushes her over the edge, and she punishes him by taking away his food privilege for the next 4 meals. He manages to piss her off even more by yapping and earns himself a night of sleeping outside in the cold hallway. That night, Siesta finds him shivering and takes him to the school kitchen where the chef feeds him limitless leftover noble food as appreciation for standing up to a noble and being the pride of plebeians like them. He has a blast with the crew and eventually leaves with Siesta, who talks about how it's a miracle that he has recovered so quickly because the duel left him in a critical state and he was basically in a coma until Louise ordered an expensive potion to treat him. He chalks this up as her having loads of money to blow as a noble. Before leaving, Siesta says she would like to sit and talk with him alone next time, which causes him to blush. He walks back to the hallway while thinking about how cute she is when he is jumped by Flame, the salamander, who drags him to Kendall's room. Kendall welcomes him and confesses she fell in love with him after seeing him defeat Bronze. She is interrupted by a guy at the window who shouts that they were supposed to meet tonight. She tells him to come by 2 hours later, but continues to get interrupted by a line of boys who think they're dating her. Finally, Louise barges in and tells Kendall to stop whatever she's trying to pull with Sato. Kendall argues that even if he is her familiar spirit, he is a human at the end of the day. Louise then warns Sato that if he makes the wrong move, a bunch of noble guys are going to go after him the next day, which convinces Sato to leave. Once they're back in Louise's room, she starts smacking him with a whip to set him straight while Sato guesses that she must be jealous of Kendall. Louise is taken aback by his dumb suggestion and explains that she doesn't care who he dates, but Kendall is off limits because her Valier and Kendall's Zerbst families have been enemies for generations. After understanding this, he tells her how he was dragged to Kendall's room by her salamander and that the situation was out of control. Louise asks why he didn't fight back since he's a swordman, but he points out that the first time he held a sword was during the duel with Bronze. She has trouble believing this because he was such a natural, but he insists that his body simply reacted on its own when he held the sword. She guesses that he might have gained some special abilities after the contract formed between them, as it happens to some familiar spirits. He then starts carrying his hay pile outside. but she allows him to sleep inside now by saying that she doesn't want Kendall trying anything funny again. The next day, Louise takes Sato to a town 3 hours away on horseback to get him a sword. The shopkeeper first gives them a small and thin sword after seeing Sato's size, but Louise demands for a bigger and broader one because she knows he can wield one from the duel. Thinking she's a bratty noble who'll be easy to rip off, he presents a golden sword crafted by a legendary alchemist that is capable of cutting through steel and says that it's for 3,000 gold. Louise exclaims that sort of money is enough to buy a whole house with a whole forest for a yard, and that she has only brought 100 gold with her. The shopkeeper says 3,000 bucks is a bargain for that sword, and most ordinary broadswords average at 200 gold. She asks if there's anything under 100 gold, to which he digs through a pile of old and rusty weapons and offers a sad-looking sword. After buying it, Sato complains about how it looks like they got it from a flea market. But Louise replies that money has been tight, and that he shouldn't complain about his master. Sato thinks back to Siesta sharing that Louise spent a lot of money on a potion to cure him, so he shuts up. Later that evening, Kendall gifts Sato the expensive golden sword and mocks Louise for not being able to afford such a cheap sword. Louise guesses that Kendall followed them and accuses her of coming to Tristane because she got tired of playing around with the boys in Germania. This prompts Kendall to point her wand at Louise, but before they can cast any magic, the classmate named Tabitha, who Kendall brought along with her, snatches away their wands. The girls then make Sato decide which sword he'd rather have, and his answer is to keep both of them, which leads to him getting bashed by both of them. Suddenly, a voice tells the girls to shut up, and they think it's Sato, but Tabitha whispers that it was the sword that spoke. The old sword continues to complain about being awakened from his sleep and makes fun of Sato's face, which makes him laugh. He decides he wants to keep the talking sword named Durf, which causes Louise to sigh from defeat because all the weirdos seem to flock to her. Some days later, Sato does Louise's laundry outside at night as usual, but finds it difficult to wash her silk clothes. Siesta finds him struggling, so the slacker Sato makes her wash them. After she's done, she asks him where he's from, to which Sato doesn't know how to explain and simply answers that he's from a place very far away. She then randomly thanks him for standing up to the nobility because it has inspired her to do her best as well, and then abruptly says goodnight and leaves. The next day, Louise makes him wait outside the castle with the rest of the familiars until all her classes are over for the day. While waiting, the chef from before finds him and invites him to the kitchen again for free food. Sato looks for Siesta, but the chef informs him that she quit because it was decided she would be the new servant of a count named Mott, and that she was picked up by a carriage earlier that day. Sato asks why this happened so suddenly, to which the chef casually replies that plebeians must always obey the nobility and walks away. Siesta doesn't leave his mind that day, and he wonders why she never told him anything. When he asks Louise later, she explains that Count Mott is a messenger from the royal palace and comes by the institute occasionally. She adds that he has a reputation of being cocky and a womanizer. He asks why on earth would such a high-ranking noble ask Siesta to be a servant, to which Durf the Sword says that it is well known that in such situations, the servants are meant to become their master's mistresses. Sato is appalled by this and decides to take matters into his own hands. He goes up to Bronze and interrupts his lame attempt at repairing his relationship with Monty. Bronze gets ready to fight again, but gets taken aback when Sato asks for help instead. Later that night, Louise is surprised to see that Sato hasn't come to have his dinner at the hall. Bronze tells her that he asked for the directions to Count Mott's manor earlier, and he and Kendall joke that Sato has abandoned her to go work for the Count instead. Meanwhile, Sato walks all the way to the manor and immediately gets caught by a guard who asks what his business is. He requests to meet the Count, claiming that he knows him. Once Count Mott sees his ugly face, he gets annoyed that a pleb has the audacity to try and speak to him directly. As he walks away, Sato shouts that he will do anything for the Count if he lets Siesta return to the institute. Mott asks him why he cares, to which he answers that Siesta is his friend, and he heard that she would be forced to be his mistress. Mott smirks and says that any pleb under the service of a noble has to do whatever they are expected to, and Sato can't change that. But woke Sato retaliates by shaming the Count for not taking consent. This insult pisses Mott off, and he reaches for his staff, but Siesta barges into the room and gets on her knees to beg for forgiveness. He warns her to get out of the way because he cannot let a lowborn insult him. but she stands her ground and says she will accept any punishment. Count Mott reconsiders and asks Sato if he will really do anything to have Siesta back, to which he instantly says yes. The Count then explains that his hobby is to collect printed matter, and there is a precious book that he has always wanted which was summoned by and now belongs to a noble family from Germania. He elaborates that one of the daughters of that family studies at the institute and that if he can get it for him, he will let Siesta go. Sato quickly realizes he's referring to Kendall from the Zerbst family and rushes to the institute. On the way, Louise, who was looking for him on horseback, finds him and takes him back. After hearing the whole story, Louise pities Siesta, but insists that they can't help her and tells him to drop the matter. Sato pretends to agree but sneaks into Kendall's soon after Louise falls asleep to ask about the book. Kendall confirms that the book is a family heirloom, but she has never opened it and doesn't care about it, so she'll give it away. Sato gets excited before he realizes that she'll only give it to him if he agrees to go out with her. This makes him super mad, so he calls all nobles filthy and storms off with the golden sword to go to the manor on horseback. Kendall along with Tabitha immediately go to Louise to tell her what happened and remind her that if a pleb draws a weapon inside a noble's household, the noble has the right to execute them on the spot. Frustrated, Louise jets off to the manor to save Sato's ass with the help of Kendall and Tabitha, whose familiar spirit is a dragon. Over at the manor, Sato is cornered by guard dogs and is dragged over to Count Mott. Sato, who is really bad at reading rooms, draws his sword and charges toward the Count, but the guards immediately block his path. Unlike in the duel, Sato feels powerless and starts shaking out of fear. The Count calls him a fool and uses water from a vase to push him back. Before he can get up, Mott turns the water into ice blades and launches them at him. Luckily, Louise arrives just before impact and makes all the blades explode. She then asks the Count for forgiveness and takes responsibility for her familiar spirit's actions. The Count threatens to punish her entire family for such a big crime, but Kendall gracefully steps in and offers the summoned book to him. After holding the book with his very hands, he gladly frees Siesta. He mentions how he has no idea what language the book is in, but upon seeing the cover, Sato realizes it's a Japanese manga. He confirms with Kendall whether her family had summoned this book, after which he realizes that he is not the only thing from his world that has been transported here. Once they return to the institute, Siesta thanks Sato for saving her and shyly pecks him on the cheek before running away. Obviously, Sato can't get too many wins because Louise sadistically announces she will soon decide a suitable punishment for him for all his misconduct. The next day, Louise starts fussing over Sato's improper manners because there will be an exhibition soon for all the second-year students to show how they have trained their familiar spirits. She suggests he demonstrate his swordsmanship, but he recalls how he couldn't even swing the sword once at Count Mott's place. As always, she gets disappointed at him and orders him to figure something out himself. While she's in class, Sato tries practicing with Durf, but his stick arms can't swing the heavy sword. Siesta catches him in the middle of this and asks if he's practicing for the exhibition. Sato gets flustered after seeing her because he remembers the kiss, but she acts totally normal. As they walk together, she adds that everyone is working extra hard with their familiars this year because Princess Henrietta, who has become the ultimate symbol of the royal family ever since the king passed away, will attend the event. She then excuses herself because even the pleb staff have their hands full with the prep, but before leaving, she holds his hands and wishes him good luck. On the day before the main event, everyone at the Institute gathers at the main gate to welcome Princess Henrietta, who makes a grand entrance fitting for her title. As soon as she gets out of her carriage, the spectators marvel at her beauty and bow out of adoration. She thanks the old headmaster for letting her attend the exhibition this time and shares that she has come out of personal interest. Later that night, Louise hears a knock at her door and finds a cloaked figure upon opening it. Before she can react, the person hugs her and reveals herself to be Princess Henrietta. She goes on and on about how much she missed Louise, but Louise kneels and bashfully tells the princess she shouldn't be in such a modest place. Henrietta ignores all this and asks Louise to drop all the formalities because they are supposed to be friends. Upon Sato's asking, Louise explains that she had the honor of being the princess' playmate when they were kids. She then bashes his head into the floor to make him bow in front of the princess, but Henrietta insists that they should act normal with her and says that she also wanted to meet the person who stood up to Count Mott. After seeing Louise's worried expression, she adds that even though the episode caused a stir at the palace, there will be no punishment from the royal family. This surprises Louise, but Henrietta reminds her that they promised each other that one would help the other if they were in trouble when they were kids. After a night of fun, Princess Henrietta says goodbye and motivates Sato to do his best at the exhibition. He shamelessly tries to hit on her, which leads to him and Louise bickering. The princess watches them quietly and whispers to herself that freedom is the best blessing before leaving. The next day, all the students show off the impressive skills of their familiar spirits, but Tabitha steals the show by flying on her cool dragon. Finally, Louise's turn comes up, and she warns Sato to just bow to the audience and not do anything weird. They then walk up the stage together, and she introduces Sato as her familiar spirit of the peasant type, which causes the crowd to burst out with laughter. Sato doesn't take this lying down and tries to put on a show with Durf the sword, but Durf instead causes Sato to fall on his face. Louise is done being a laughing stock, so she drags him out of the stage. While they bicker away, they run into a giant golem which attacks them under the command of a mysterious green-haired woman. The attack results in Sato being caught by the beast, and despite him telling Louise to run, she tries to cast a fireball which misses its mark and instead results in an explosion. The Green Witch cackles at the failure, but then notices a crack in the tower that Louise's explosion magic hits, and uses this opening to punch through its wall. Once she succeeds, she lets go of Sato as a token of gratitude, and luckily, Tabitha swoops in with her dragon to catch him. In the end, the trespasser escapes after leaving a note behind which reveals that she is the infamous mage thief known as Fauke the Sculptor, and that she has stolen the Staff of Destruction, which is a precious treasure of the palace given to the Institute for guarding. After checking on Louise and Sato, Princess Henrietta quickly leaves for the palace to report the incident. As Louise watches her go, she hopes that the princess won't be made responsible for this incident since she has heard bad things about the palace affairs recently. Sato then asks her why she didn't run to safety when the golem had him hostage, to which she says that a real mage would never leave their familiar spirit behind. The next day, the Institute scrambles to handle the Fauke situation, leaving the students to rot in class the whole day in the name of study period. Kendall gossips to Louise how she's heard that Princess Henrietta will be held responsible for the incident, because it was her arrival here that caused the Institute to divert its guards from the vault that protected the staff to the princess instead. To add to that, she visited the Institute despite all her advisors insisting against it. This causes Louise to worry, but at that moment, one of the staff calls Louise and Tabitha out to go meet the headmaster. At the headmaster's office, his secretary shares that she has gathered various testimonies from the locals in the area who have reported sighting a shadowy figure emerging from a deserted shack in the woods on the day of the crime. She shows a sketch of the figure based on the testimonies to Louise and Tabitha, who confirm that it is indeed Fauke. One of the teachers recommends reporting this to the palace immediately, but the headmaster decides that the Institute needs to obtain the Staff of Destruction on its own to restore its honor, and urges those who are willing to do the task to raise their staffs. An awkward silence spreads in the room as none of the teachers come forward. Finally, Louise, Kendall, and Tabitha raise their wands and take up the task. The headmaster believes they are in good hands because Tabitha is a knight despite her young age, and Kendall comes from a powerful military family. He officially assigns them to the mission, and his secretary Miss Long volunteers to be their guide. On the way, Sato asks why Fauke is thieving around if she's a mage from the nobility class, to which Miss Long explains that not all mages are nobles, as many get demoted to peasants, and such mages usually become guards or criminals. She reveals that she, too, is a mage who's been demoted to peasant class but doesn't share the reason. Soon, they reach the abandoned shack, and after confirming that it is empty and has no traps, Sato, Kendall, and Tabitha go inside to look for clues, while Louise stands guard outside and Miss Long scouts the surroundings. Sato and Kendall quickly decide the place is worthless, but Tabitha discovers the box which is supposed to contain the Staff of Destruction. However, before they can open it, a scream is heard outside and the roof gets torn out by a golem. Tabitha and Kendall's spells don't have any effect on it, so Louise makes an explosion on it which grabs its attention. The golem starts stomping its way toward her, but she stays put, yelling out that she is a noble who will never turn her back to an enemy. She casts another explosion, but it doesn't do much, and the golem hammers its fist on the ground. Sato grabs Louise and saves her from the blow, but she immediately barks at him to get out of the way. Shockingly, he slaps her and says that it doesn't matter that she's a noble if she dies, but she cries out that she's always made fun of, and if she runs away, people will make fun of her even more. Sato picks her up and runs away before the golem strikes again, and puts Louise on Tabitha's dragon. The golem starts stirring, so he tells the others to fly away and stays back to fight. He first swings the golden sword at its arm, but the blade snaps in half. Durf tells him to use him instead, but Sato hesitates because he doesn't want to break the poor old sword. Durf says he has no choice unless he wants to die, so Sato grits his teeth and grabs Durf. Immediately, the rune on his hand starts glowing, and he feels the same strength he felt during the duel against Bronze. He charges and chops off one of the golem's legs, but it quickly regenerates, causing him to panic. Louise impulsively grabs the Staff of Destruction and jumps off the dragon to help Sato, but nothing happens when she swings it around. Sato grabs it from her and uses it to obliterate the golem's head with a massive explosion. The girls get super excited over him using a magic staff, but stop in their tracks when they realize Fauke must be around if they faced the golem. At that moment, Miss Long picks up the Staff of Destruction and lets her hair down while saying that it's wonderful that the Staff of Destruction could destroy her golem. They all freeze over the shock that she is Fauke, but when Sato tries to reach for Durf, she points the staff at them and warns them not to move. She explains that although she managed to steal the staff, she couldn't figure out how to use it and was hoping that she'd learn by luring the Institute's teachers out to where she hid it. Even though none of the teachers came, she figured that Louise's familiar spirit would do the job as he has Gundalf. She doesn't explain further and bids farewell before pressing the button on the staff, but nothing happens. Sato uses the opportunity to lunge and stab her in the gut, after which he reveals that the staff is actually a single-use weapon from his world called a rocket launcher. After that, they return to the Institute with the Staff of Destruction, where the headmaster congratulates them and says that the three girls will be the guests of honor at that night's banquet, where they will be showered with rewards by the palace. Louise asks what Sato will get, but the headmaster regrettably says that he will not receive anything because he is a peasant. Sato says that he doesn't care, but he requests the headmaster to answer a question of his. After the girls are dismissed, Sato reveals to the headmaster that he doesn't belong in this world and that the Staff of Destruction is a weapon from his world. Since that is the case, he asks where they got this weapon from. The headmaster seems to accept his wild statement and says that the staff is a memento from a man who saved his life over 30 years ago. The man collapsed shortly after saving him from a beast due to several terrible wounds he was already suffering from. The headmaster took him back to the Institute to heal him with the best medical care, but nothing worked and he eventually passed away without the headmaster ever learning who he was and where he came from. He reveals that the man had two staffs, and while he gave one to the palace, he buried the one that saved him. This information turns out to be a dead end for Sato, who was hoping for leads on how to return to his world. At the banquet, Louise makes a grand entrance but ignores every blushing guy to ask Sato for a dance. Sato, who has never seen her look so beautiful, shyly accepts, and they awkwardly slow dance. Louise says that after seeing him use the staff, she finally believes that he's from another world and then asks if he wants to return. When Sato says yes, she seems weirdly disappointed but brushes it aside and thanks him for saving her from the golem. Some days later, summer break begins and most students leave campus to meet family or go on vacation. While Louise spends the break at the Institute, Kendall goes along with Tabitha, who has invited her to visit her hometown Galia and meet her family. Kendall excitedly asks a ton of questions about Tabitha family, but she silently reads her book with a poker face the entire time. Once they almost reach their destination, Kendall looks outside to see the emblem of Galia's royal family. To her surprise, their carriage stops in front of Galia's royal palace, and they are greeted by a butler who warmly welcomes Tabitha as Lady Charlotte, revealing that she is a member of this kingdom's royal family. Kendall absorbs the lavish surroundings and says that she looks forward to meeting Tabitha's father, but she shakes her head and tells her to wait before leaving the room. The butler Perry serves Kendall tea and tells her that he never expected Charlotte to bring a friend back with her. After Kendall confirms that Tabitha's real name is actually Charlotte, she asks him why she came to study abroad with a fake name. The butler decides to spill all the tea and reveals that the decision to study abroad was by her uncle Joseph, who is Galia's current king. He elaborates that Tabitha's father was the current king's younger and more popular brother and was murdered 5 years ago by King Joseph's men since he feared the title would go to him instead after their father's death. The conspirators who were behind this assassination also targeted Charlotte, who was his heir. During one of their banquets, she was served water that was laced with magic poison that would turn the person who drank it insane. Charlotte's mother caught wind of the plan in the last second and drank it to save her, but went insane to the point that she thinks her daughter is a rag doll and mistakes her real daughter as one of the conspirators in the royal family. Since the rag doll was a gift given by Charlotte to her mother and was named Tabitha, Charlotte has also taken up that name as a coping mechanism. The only good thing that came out of this was that the noble who tried to get rid of Charlotte was exposed and no direct attempts at her life have been taken since the incident. However, the palace still sent her on difficult missions with low chances of survival, which she always somehow completed successfully. Finally, with no other way to get rid of her, they honored her with the title of knighthood and sent her away to study abroad. After hearing this crazy story, Kendall decides to be Tabitha's most supportive friend. Later that night, Tabitha is given another mission by King Joseph, which she decides to go through with tomorrow evening. She asks Kendall to wait for her, but Kendall says she heard everything about her past and that she will accompany Tabitha whether she likes it or not. During bedtime, Tabitha has nightmares of her mother drinking the poisoned water, so Kendall hugs her until she calms down and promises to keep her safe. Over at the academy, Louise accidentally drinks a love potion that Monty meant to give Bronze out of spite for cheating on her. This causes her to act all lovey-dovey with Sato, who has no idea what to do with her. Soon enough, Monty confesses the truth and claims that the effects of the potion can last months or even up to a year. Louise's possessiveness and non-stop PDA grows day by day and eventually causes a misunderstanding with Siesta, who goes away upset, leaving Sato in a situation to choose between the two girls. He ends up running after Siesta and tries to clear the air by revealing that it's all because of a love potion Louise drank accidentally. But she doesn't believe him because potions that alter people's emotions are banned by law. He doesn't know what to say after that, so she leaves after a cold goodbye. Pissed, Sato barges into Monty's room and demands her to make Louise back to normal. She acts aloof at first, but he yells that there has to be some sort of potion to undo the magic. She replies that such a potion exists, but it's not possible to make it here because she doesn't have the ingredients. Bronze warns Sato not to treat a noble like her poorly, but after Sato threatens to duel him again, he quickly switches sides and tries to convince Monty to cooperate. She still whines over how difficult it is to make the potion, but Sato pulls out his trump card and blackmails her by saying that he will snitch her out to the principal for making an illegal love potion. Finally, she agrees to go find the rare potion the next day at Lake Lagdorian. She elaborates that Lake Lagdorian is a place where water mages go to form pacts with the resident spirit, and that is where they have the best chance of obtaining the antidote spirit tier. The next day, Sato, Louise, Monty, and Bronze start their journey early in the morning on horseback. It takes them half a day to reach their destination, and once they're there, Bronze accidentally falls into the lake, making Monty realize that the water level is unusually high and that it's a sign that the spirit is upset about something. She decides their best course of action is to just wait till the spirit shows up after sunset to find out what happened. At dusk, Monty brings out her frog familiar spirit and pricks her finger with a needle to pour a drop of her blood on its head. She then instructs it to go to the water spirit and tell it that somebody who formed a contract with it wants to talk. After the frog jumps into the lake, Sato asks if they'll have to tell the spirit a sad story to make it cry, to which Monty answers that although it is called a spirit tear, it is actually a tiny portion of the spirit's body. She hopes that the spirit will remember her from the time she made a contract with it as a child, because only then will it give them a spirit tear. She warns them not to do anything to upset the spirit, because not only will they not get the tear after that, but their lives will also be in danger. Suddenly, a jet of water roars out of the lake in front of them, which prompts Monty to identify herself and requests the spirit to show itself in a physical form if it recognizes her. The jet transforms into a translucent figure of a woman who confirms that she remembers Monty's blood. Relieved, Monty asks the spirit to give a fragment of her body, but she declines straight up. Sato barks out that he really needs it, and after ignoring Monty's warnings, gets on his knees and promises to do whatever she tells him to if she gives them a spirit tear. She thinks for a while, and then says that if they can get rid of the mages that attack the water spirits for increasing the amount of water here, she will give the spirit tier. Sato accepts the terms without hesitation, putting Monty and Bronze in a state of shock. Later that night, they all hide in the woods and keep an eye on the lake for any suspicious activity. Monty and Bronze guess that the attacker must be a powerful wind mage because they can use air magic to create a sphere of air with which they can walk to the bottom of the lake where the main form of the water spirit dwells. At that moment, Bronze notices a cloaked figure by the edge of the lake who appears to be casting a spell from their staff. Sato immediately gets on his feet to ambush the mage, but Bronze stops him and reminds him that his opponent is probably very powerful, so fighting them head-on is not a good idea. He suggests that he casts some magic to lure the person and Sato will surprise them by attacking from behind. Sato teases him for taking the easier task, but Bronze slimily says that he's simply taking their specialities as mage and swordsman into consideration. Bronze uses his earth magic to launch a giant turd at the intruder, but it turns out that the attackers are two mages, and they take turns to repel his magic to ensure that they're never caught off guard. Sato unsheathes his sword and lunges, but the taller attacker throws a fireball, and the other one follows it with an ice attack. Sato slashes through all of them, but eventually gets overwhelmed and gets knocked out. Louise, who is furious that her love is hurt, launches an explosion at them, which does nothing but push back the attackers' hoods to reveal that they are none other than Kendall and Tabitha. They finally get a good look at everyone and realize they have been fighting Sato, Louise, Bronze and Monty and ask why they're here. After hearing about the love potion, Kendall reveals that she and Tabitha are here because they were ordered to defeat the water spirit by the royal family, because the water level has been increasing and destroying the kingdom's territory. Seeing how their goals are conflicting, Sato advises Monty to go and ask the water spirit why it is upset. After summoning the water spirit again, Sato asks why she is raising the water level, to which she replies that somebody stole the spirit's treasure and so they will go on to increase the water until they cover the entire world. Once that happens, they are bound to find the treasure again. Sato says he will retrieve the treasure for them and asks what it is called, to which the spirit answers that it is called Andy's ring, and one of the thieves was someone called Cromwell. Monty recalls reading something about the ring and explains that it has the ability to create artificial souls. With this information, Sato promises to bring back the ring, but Bronze tells him to give up because there's no way the water spirit will believe a peasant stranger. However, the spirit immediately says that it believes him and gives him the spirit tier. When asked why, it answers that Gundolf kept his oath with it in the past, and so it will trust him again. Sato realizes this is the second time since someone referred to him as Gundolf, but he takes the opportunity to vow that he will return the treasure someday if the spirit returns the water levels to normal. The spirit accepts his vow and reverts the water back to normal in an instant. After returning to the academy, Louise is given the spirit tier and goes through the embarrassment of remembering all the dumb stuff she did to Sato during her love potion days. Sato is just barely spared from a whole lot of whipping because of a surprise visit by Princess Henrietta. Seeing the princess sneak into their room through the window so late at night worries Louise, and she asks her what is wrong. Henrietta holds her hand and shares that she has an urgent request to make to her and Sato in secret. Once they kneel for her like lapdogs, she breaks the news that she has decided to marry into a family from Germania to form a strong alliance and secure the small kingdom of Tristane with the help of Germania's superior military power. Louise gets upset that the princess has to settle for a marriage of convenience, but Henrietta says she doesn't mind because it is her duty after all. However, before she commits to her marriage, she needs to get something done. Louise yells out that she will do anything for her, which is exactly what Princess Henrietta wants to hear. She then requests them to relay a letter to the Prince Wales in Albion, adding that if the contents of the letter leaked, the engagement would surely be called off. A dense Sato wonders what kind of letter could destroy an engagement, which prompts a kick and a scolding from Louise. Princess Henrietta continues that Albion is currently politically unstable due to a coup orchestrated by rogue nobles, and that the royal family will soon fall from their reign, so it is risky to go there. She then starts holding back her tears and apologizes for asking them to do such a task, but says that nobody else can be trusted to carry it out. Louise's heart immediately melts and she takes up the mission, saying that it is an honor to be bestowed the job. Once she accepts, the bedroom door creaks open and Bronze reveals that he heard everything. He then kneels and offers himself to help in the task as well, which the princess gladly accepts, much to the disappointment of Sato and Louise. Later that night, Sato is approached by Siesta, who found out that the love potion business was all true and apologizes for being rude to him. He is glad to get along with her again and asks her if there's anyone at the school who is a history nerd after getting a flashback of the spirit calling him Gundalf. She takes him to a bald teacher, who after hearing Sato's questions, explains that in addition to the 4 elements of fire, water, wind and earth, there used to exist a 5th element which formed a pentagon for a mage with a complete set. The 5th element was called Void, and Gundalf was the familiar spirit of a legendary Void mage. He adds that the element seems to have been lost in time, and there hasn't been a Void mage in the modern age yet. Although the teacher admits that the rune on Sato's hand looks like the one Gundalf had, as long as there is no Void mage, nobody can say for sure that he is Gundalf. After Sato's curiosity is satisfied, he notices a flask with piss-colored fluid, which the teacher claims is dragon blood that he recovered from a legendary site where 2 dragons fought, resulting in the death of one and disappearance of another. Sato stares at the flask for a while and thinks to himself that the blood smells weird. Later, Louise starts doubting herself and wonders if she's fit for the princess mission since she can't go magic. Sato feels bad and tells her not to worry, but if she needs help, he will protect her. The next day, Louise, Sato and Bronze wait for one of the princess guards to show up who will guide them to Albion. While waiting, Louise thinks back to when the princess gave her the precious ruby of water ring that her mother gave her as a thank you for taking up the job, and feels the pressure weigh down on her. At that moment, Bronze's giant mole spirit appears from the ground and pounces on Louise to try and eat the ring because it is attracted to gems. Thankfully, a gust of wind pushes it back before Louise loses the ring, after which a man mounted on a griffin descends from above. He introduces himself as Ward, leader of the Griffin squad who has been sent by the princess to accompany them. He then holds Louise's hand and says that he is glad he arrived in time to save her, because she is his precious fiancée, and lifts her off her feet. Sato and Bronze's jaws drop at the sight of this, but Louise blushes and simply says that it's been a while since they met instead of beating the sense out of the guy. After that, they embark on their journey with Louise in Ward's arm, which causes Sato to feel weirdly jealous. Their first stop is at La Rochelle City, which is a city built by Earth mages out of a monolith, and where the gang will stay the night. Sato acts unimpressed by the whole thing, so once Ward is out of sight, Louise tells him that her parents decided her fiancé. Sato casually remarks that he seems stuck up, but still is the best noble he's met so far, and that since Ward is here, he didn't really have to come. Louise yells out that he has to be here because it's his duty as her familiar and storms off. During dinner, Ward expresses his interest over Sato's mysterious abilities to expertly use a sword and his successful attempt at using the Staff of Destruction, because of which he asks for a practice match with him. Sato grumpily accepts, but Louise tries to push back to no avail because Ward assures her that he will go easy on Sato. After that, he tries to take Louise to his room, to which she initially refuses, but he whispers that he has something important to tell her, after which she lets him take her. Sato and Bronze end up sharing a room where Sato sulks around after Bronze goes to hit on a girl he saw at dinner. Sato asks Durf if he knows about Gundalf, to which Durf reveals that he is the loyal sword of Gundalf and has been serving him for 6,000 years, which confirms that Sato is in fact Gundalf. Sato points out that he just happened to pick Durf up by chance, but Durf argues that there are no coincidences in this world. Sato asks why he never told him before, to which Durf replies that he never asked. Durf reveals that the Gundalf rune gives him the power to us any weapon, but the item needs to be specifically designed as a weapon, which is why the fancy golden sword didn't work, because it was made to look like a pretty ornament. Sato asks if he'll win against Ward if he uses Durf, but the sword replies that it all depends on Sato's power. Meanwhile, Ward reminds Louise of the times she would sit in a boat alone when she got sad after being compared to her sister's magical abilities, and he would come to comfort her. He claims that he always thought that she has some hidden potential and that after this mission, they should get married. He shares his ambition of becoming the most powerful noble in all of Halkaginia and that he needs her by his side. He then grabs her face and whispers that he will protect her, which causes her to have a flashback of Sato saying the same thing. She ends up muttering Sato's name, after which Ward backs off and says that he will win her heart over by the end of this mission, but for now, he will stay in another room. The next day, the two boys begin their practice match and Sato launches his offense, but Ward manages to counter all his agile attacks and push him back. Sato tries again, but this time, Ward hits him with a wind spell that sweeps Sato off his feet. Ward says that although he has a lot of raw power, he is still a novice with many openings and that he can't win against a mage at his present skill level, which means that he can't protect Louise. After having his ass handed to him, Sato runs off to cry, but is followed by Louise, who tells him that he wasn't expected to win against the Griffin squad leader anyway, and that it is still his job to protect her. Sato snaps and says that she should have Ward protect her instead, after which she sadly tells him that she's going to marry Ward and walks away. After some time, Bronze comes to annoy him, but they are interrupted by an earthquake as the ground in front of them begins shifting until a golem appears. They hear the familiar laugh of Falke, after which Sato draws his sword and slashes the arm that the golem uses to attack. After she regrows its hand, Bronze retaliates by sending a dozen bronze Valkyries her way, which all get swiftly destroyed. At that moment, a fireball hits the golem's side, and they look up to see Kendall and Tabitha on her dragon. By this time, the fight causes enough of a commotion to attract all the locals who come to investigate. Falke, who reveals that it was her intention only to stall them, says her job is done and escapes. A deep horn is heard from the distance, which Bronze realizes is the signal that the ship they were supposed to take is departing. Having missed the ship, Sato and Bronze keep Kendall and Tabitha company when Kendall reveals that she saw Ward at the school and found him very handsome, so she figured out where they all went to and decided to crash the party. The next day, Sato asks the receptionist at the hotel they were staying at about Louise and Ward, to which he responds that they left together the previous day. The man adds that they mentioned their other companions were going back to school, but knowing this to be untrue, Sato realizes that something fishy is going on. He rushes out to ask Bronze how they can get to Albion, to which he answers that Albion is a free floating island, so they can only go by the flying ship that they missed. Frustrated, Sato runs up to a cliff and shouts Louise's name. At that moment, Louise, who is on the ship, senses his voice and looks out the window, but seeing nothing there, believes she just imagined it. Ward notices this and sadly says that her heart belongs to Sato, which prompts her to strongly deny it. She then says that she accepts his marriage proposal, which pleases him, and he says that now they just have to reach Prince Wales. He asks her where the prince is, but she hesitates to tell him because she promised Princess Henrietta not to reveal that information to anyone before they reached Albion. Ward drops the subject and tells her to rest before they arrive. Once they reach Albion, Louise takes Ward to the place where Prince Wales is supposed to be hiding. They immediately get surrounded by soldiers who don't back down even after Louise identifies herself as Tristane's ambassador. It is only after she reveals she was sent here by Princess Henrietta and shows her ring that one of the soldiers comes forward and extends his hand to show a similar ring. Once their gems align, they start glowing while the soldier explains that his ring is the Ruby of the Wind and has been passed down for generations in Albion's royal family, and that it combines with her Ruby of the Water to create a rainbow. He then takes off his helmet to show that he is Prince Wales. Once they're alone, Louise gives him Princess Henrietta's letter, which he reads, and then gives his own response letter for her to deliver. Louise tries to inquire about the contents, which the prince swiftly shuts down, but he does say that the civil war going on between his royal family and the rebel nobles is more than what it appears on the surface, and that a secret organization called Reconquista is pulling the strings of the rebels, and that he has recently discovered the people belonging in it. He then asks Louise to tell the princess that it is his duty to protect his nation, and that he will do it even at the cost of his life. The next day, Ward presses the matter of marriage harder on Louise, but she refuses to go through with it before even returning to Tristane. Ward grabs her and pleads with her, saying that Reconquista needs her. Hearing this name makes her jump, and she flat out rejects him after finding out his true motives. But she gets cornered by a shady-looking man who forces her into a trance by using an obsidian ring. The next thing she knows, she finds herself standing at the altar with Ward and Prince Wales officiating their wedding. When asked if she accepts Ward as his husband, she realizes that she has no control over her body and, despite trying to fight it, almost ends up saying that she does. Right at that moment, Sato barges into the church and shouts out her name, which causes her to snap out of her daze. Ward asks him how he found them, to which Sato answers that Bronze Mole tracked them down like a bloodhound by sniffing out Louise's ring. The prince tries to interfere, but Ward drives his sword into him, leading him to realize that Ward is part of the Reconquista before dropping to the ground. In his last moments, he hands the Ruby of Wind to Louise. Ward has Sato at sword point and urges Louise to come with him, but she refuses, saying that he is no longer the man she once knew. He simply says that people change and that she will understand what he means someday. Sato activates Gundalf's rune and uses all his determination to become strong enough to slice through Ward's magical attacks and strike him down. However, Ward seems unbothered because he reveals that 2 out of 3 objectives have been completed. The first was to ill Prince Wales, the second was to obtain Henrietta's letter, which he sneakily did, and the last objective is to get Louise. However, he decides that if he can't have her, she should be destroyed and sets the place on fire, but she and Sato are rescued by Kendall, who uses a levitation spell to get them out of there. Once they're safe on Dragonback, Sato kisses Louise and she actually kisses back. Once they return to Tristane, Louise gives Princess Henrietta Prince Wales' ring and tells her the sad news of his death and the loss of her letter. She feels guilty for not knowing Ward's true nature and apologizes for the tragedy. The kind princess asks her to keep her head up, and after doing so, they see each other crying and hug. Ultimately, the princess doesn't blame Louise and thanks her for bringing his ring to her. Later, Louise returns to the academy and goes up to the headmaster's office to give her report on the mission. There, she sees the bald teacher, Mr. Colbert, get granted a long vacation so that he can go investigate a location where he believes the legendary dragon that disappeared resides. Once she and the headmaster are alone, she recounts the events at Gallia and tells him about the mysterious Reconquista. While he mulls the info over, she asks if he knows what it means to be a descendant of the Void because one of the Reconquista members called her that. The headmaster tells her she doesn't need to worry about it, but takes it as confirmation that the whole Sato equals Gundalf theory is true. Back in her room, Louise gets pissed that her clothes are all worn out because Sato was careless when he washed them, prompting her to try and discipline him with force, but Sato doesn't take it lying down and eventually their fight leads to him saying that he doesn't want to be her familiar and leaves. Siesta finds him outside after he storms off and tells him that she's going to her hometown for vacation. He talks about how he wishes he could also go back to his home, but it's too far away. Hearing this, Siesta shares that her great-grandfather also was said to come from another world, which catches Sato's attention. She elaborates that her great-granddad was involved in a fight between dragons in which the one he was riding fell with him and the other disappeared. This completely matches Mr. Colbert's dragon story, so Sato frantically asks her where her granddad's dragon is. She answers that it has been enshrined somewhere as a family heirloom, but she has never seen it herself. Hoping it's a lead to guide him to his world, he decides to join her on her trip back home. During all this, Kendall hides behind a bush after spotting Sato and decides to follow them after hearing everything. Meanwhile, Louise feels bad for the way things turned out earlier, so she practices different ways of making up with him without seeming too desperate. But all her attempts are foiled when she sees Sato jet off with Siesta on a horse. She finds out from the chef that Siesta is going back home in the village of Taub. Louise has never felt so furious and can't believe that Sato had the nerve to kiss her when he's clearly so close to Siesta that he'll go home with her. However, her attention diverts when she realizes she recognizes the name of the village Taub. Over at Taub, Siesta successfully swipes a map hidden in the back of their family shed, which has the marked location of where the dragon is. While looking at it, they get jump-scared by Kendall and her salamander, after which Tabitha shows up on her dragon and Bronze appears with his cute mole. Kendall reveals that they're here to join him on this treasure hunt. The place turns out to be a deep cave which even the locals don't dare to enter because it is apparently annexed for orc demons. Suddenly, they are attacked by a spell that makes a rock spike above them fall. A voice calls them thieves and demands to leave the place at once, but they soon recognize it as Mr. Colbert's. He chills after he finds out it's them, and Louise emerges from behind him. After realizing everyone has the same objective of seeing the dragon, they group up and continue forward, but things are still tense between Sato and Louise. They reach the end of the tunnel which leads into a lush forest where they find a huge locked shed. As Mr. Colbert attempts to unlock it with magic, Sato checks on Tabitha, who is staring at something some distance away. However, once he sees what she's looking at, his heart skips a beat because he finds a Japanese engraving. He reads it to find out that it is the tombstone for a Navy ensign named Sasaki. At that moment, the shed door opens and they all walk inside to see a huge otherworldly object, but Sato recognizes it as a fighter aircraft. Mr. Colbert says that this might mean that Sato has a chance at returning to his world because according to their legend, one of the dragons disappeared while the one with Siesta's great-granddad stayed. This tale had happened during a solar eclipse, so it might have been that while the other dragon rider passed through a gateway to their world, Siesta's granddad didn't make it in time before the eclipse was over. If Sato uses this aircraft to ride into the eclipse, he might return home as well. They bring the aircraft back to the academy where Sato wonders how they will make it fly. He remembers that Mr. Colbert has some dragon blood, which is actually the fuel for the aircraft, so he asks Mr. Colbert to try and replicate it magically. Later, he boards the plane and realizes he naturally understands how to use all the controls, which Durf reminds is because of his Gundalf-granted abilities. Over his excitement for the possibility of returning to his world, he has been ignoring Louise, who has been quietly watching him and feeling heartbroken about him leaving. However, one of her sulking sessions is interrupted by Bronze, who urgently tells her that Gallia has changed its name to New State of Reconquista and declared war on Tristane. While she processes this, Sato comes up to her and hesitantly tells her that Mr. Colbert informed him that a solar eclipse will occur 3 days later, and if all goes right, he will depart this world. Louise pulls off a convincing act of not really caring and wishes him luck, which pisses him off and he walks away abruptly. Later that night, the headmaster assembles all the students to break the news of the inevitable war and announces that the academy will be closed indefinitely as it will also send forces to fight under Princess Henrietta's command. Realizing her best friend is on the front lines, Louise decides she will enlist into the army as well. That night, she says goodbye to a sleeping Sato and leaves a note for him. Once he wakes up, he reads it to find out that she fired him and gave him leave to go wherever he wants. After he finds out about the war from Kendall, he starts worrying but wonders if he should even care if he can leave everything behind and go back home. However, he remembers all the memories he made with Louise while he was here and starts feeling weird. On the day of the eclipse, Kendall asks Sato if he feels completely fine to leave Louise behind, to which he doesn't really know how to reply. Before he can say anything, Mr. Colbert arrives with barrels full of gasoline that he was able to produce. He tells Sato how they would have usually had a farewell ceremony for him, but Gallia deployed a battleship in Taub the previous day and Princess Henrietta is already advancing with her army to fight them. After hearing this, Sato jets off to Taub to save his best girls and risks losing the solar eclipse. By the time he reaches, Tristane's forces are in a disadvantaged position and the eclipse is just beginning. He single-handedly shoots down the enemy dragon riders who are no match to his fighter jet. Ward swoops in with his much faster dragon and uses magic to try and take Sato down, but he goes behind him and is about to shoot but runs out of ammo. Meanwhile, Kendall, Bronze, and Tabitha join forces to take Fauke and Hermine Gollum down by using the alchemy spell they were taught of the first day of class. After that, Tabitha and Kendall zap Ward's dragon, letting Sato take a breather. At that moment, Louise jumps off the dragon and Sato desperately tries to catch her while calling her a dumbass. She grabs his hand, but calls him selfish for trying to leave on his own. Once she's on the plane, Ward regains control of his dragon and flies toward them, but Sato draws his sword and yells out that he only cares about protecting Louise because he is her familiar. Suddenly, his Gundalf rune starts glowing and Durf tells Louise that it's time for her to wake up as a user of Void. Her eyes suddenly gloss over and her face turns blank as she points her wand at Ward. Durf instructs Sato to buy her some time because it takes time to cast Void magic. Ward manages to destroy one of the plane's engines, causing them to free fall with a smirking Wardhot on their tail. However, a sudden burst of light from Louise's wand blinds everything and sets the main Gallia battleship on fire. Sato grabs her as she loses consciousness and once they land, he sees that the solar eclipse has ended, but seeing Louise safe is enough to satisfy him. After Reconquista faces its terrible defeat, the creepy man who was controlling Louise during her wedding with Ward encounters Kendall and Tabitha while trying to flee. He uses a ring to mind control them as well. but they recognize it was the Andes ring that the water spirit wanted back. He laughs about how he is unbeatable as long as he has this ring, but gets cut short by Bronze, who knocks him out with a stick from behind. Eventually, Louise wakes up to find herself in Sato's arms and asks why he's still here after she fired him, to which he replies that he can't read this world's writing. She sees that the aircraft has been destroyed as well, but he says that what's done is done. She starts crying because he can no longer return to his world, but kisses him out of the bittersweet happiness. She then adds that this means the contract between them has been renewed. For their courage and victories during the battle, Princess Henrietta gives Louise, Kendall, Tabitha, and Bronze medals of valor. After peace is restored, everything returns to normal and Sato continues his life in this magical world as Louise the Zero's familiar spirit. If you liked this video, then hit the subscribe button for more, and watch this video on your screen next.